Amud Aleph on page 4a, and the Gemara that we learned yesterday was about how to get around the problem of a sukkah that's too high. What is the solution? What's a way to correct it, rectify this sukkah? So the Gemara came up with an idea that, well, if you have a sukkah that's too high, instead of lowering the whole schach, which I guess could be complicated, how do you get up there? And you need to be on ladders or uh, build the whole roof differently. But the Gemara comes up with a way that, well, how about just minimizing? How about just minimizing the space to the roof by adding floor to the sukkah? In this way, it'll be less empty space of the sukkah. It won't be 20 amos high. It won't be a 20 cubits high sukkah because you will put stuff in the sukkah and it should be considered like earth, like ground, like the ground of the sukkah. And how do you do that? So the Gemara's method was that you need to be mevatel it, that you're going to nullify it. And the only thing is, the Gemara says nullifying doesn't always work. You're nullifying it because what you want it to be considered is that it's real ground. It's not just some temporary platform or chair that you're standing on. So, for example, if you want to just put some chairs there and walk on the chairs and say, I am in a sukkah that's less than 20 amis high, that wouldn't work. And say, well, I'm standing on the chair, and from the chair to the roof is less than 20 amis. So that wouldn't work because that's not a floor. It's not a normal floor. And the Gemara says that there's also stuff, if you stick it on the ground, it won't be considered bittul. It won't be considered nullified and considered like the ground of the sukkah. And the understanding of Rashi was because these are items that will get ruined, and items that will get ruined, you don't really, most people are not going to make them um, uh, nullified to be used as ground because they're going to get ruined. So just because you want to do that, we don't really accept your nullification as a valid nullification of these items. What are the items that it's talking about? It's talking about a car and a kesses. And we translated yesterday to be some type of mattress or cushions or pillows, and you're sticking them on the ground and you're going to be walking on them. And so the Gemara says that if you want to use them, that will not work as a miyut, even though you verbally said that you're mavatel them. You verbally said, I am nullifying them. They're going to be the floor of my sukkah. And the Gemara says, Batla daita yetzel kol adam. Your das, your knowledge is nullified relative to the rest of the world, and it's not considered acceptable when you say it's batal. We mentioned yesterday that there were other reasons given by the commentaries as well, that possibly that these items you generally need. It's common for people to need the mattress and the pillow. I guess people randomly have guests and they need them. So even though you're mavatal it's the normal thing is that when people come to your house to stay, you're going to end up taking it, or you're going to end up possibly needing it. And so even though you said you're mavatal but the derech of the world is to use it when you need it, and it therefore will not be nullified. Your nullification is not a proper nullification. Heaven, straw. If you were mavatal the straw and you said, I am nullifying the straw to the sukkah, and the Gemara said, for sure, if you put earth there, you take earth and you stick it there, and that's what people used as grounds in the olden days. That was the typical ground. They didn't have tile floors; they had earth. So if you have earth, if you put earth there and you mevatel it, then we believe you. Then it's acceptable. It's considered nullified, and that's the ground of your sukkah. And the sukkah will now be considered a kosher sukkah after you do that. The Yesterday we mentioned a little about the issue of the fact is the walls are still taller than 20 amas, and so even though you minimize the space in the middle of the sukkah, but the fact is this is a sukkah that's a these are walls that are walls of a permanent sukkah. They need to be held down because something that's that high is going to need to be much stronger. And so seemingly you didn't gain much by minimizing the distance of the floor to the ceiling. If the fact is these walls are still over 20 amas, and it's going to cause that your sukkah is going to need to be more permanent. It's going to need to be held down. So on that, we explained that the fact is that we look at it, the halachic element of this sukkah is a sukkah that does not need to be so sturdy, because this sukkah is a sukkah that's less than 20 amas high. You made it in a way that you might have to make it sturdier, but it's a sukkah that's a size of less than 20 amas. So even though it is somewhat, it is going to have to be sturdy because the walls are taller, but the fact is the size of your sukkah is less than 20 amas, and therefore it would be acceptable as a kosher sukkah. I did not mention the other issue. There is a different issue, and that is that under normal circumstances, you can't go and take something that's not kosher and sort of like fix it up afterwards. And now, all of a sudden it's kosher. I fixed it. Why can't you do that? There's a concept that you have to build the sukkah, tasa. You have to make it. You can't have it that it's like just made and it's okay, it's good. For example, the example would be if you have a haystack and you decide, you know what, I'll just dig a hole in it, and now the hay will be used, will be the schach, and it'll be the walls, and I just sort of like just made a hole inside it, and that's where I'm going to be using as my sukkah. So the problem is you didn't really put schach on top of your sukkah. You didn't build a sukkah. You made a hole. The sukkah was sort of like retroactive. It's sort of like backwards. You're doing things back in a backwards way. That doesn't work in most mitzvahs. There's the Hebrew term for it is called taseh v'loy min ha'asud. You have to make it, and it can't be something that was made. So the idea would be that if you built such a sukkah, you then have to take off the schach and put it back on. Something along those lines in order to kosher it up. Do it in order. You made the walls. Okay, let's take off the schach. Let's lift it up and put it down. Put it in the right order. Here, what are we doing? We have a non-kosher sukkah. Oh, the problem? It's too tall. What am I going to do? Stick in a platform and throw some earth inside the sukkah. Okay, so now the sukkah becomes sort of like, it becomes kosher, but it was never built as a sukkah. It was built as a non-kosher sukkah originally. And what I did was I just sort of like removed the problem from it. I sort of got around the problem, and now it's sort of like a sukkah that's appeared. It's almost like the sukkah just appeared uh, out of nowhere. It wasn't really built. I pulled out the problem, which was it was too tall. So I now fixed up the problem. So that is something discussed. This is something discussed by the commentaries. How does the Gemara uh, resolve that issue of having a sukkah that sort of like happens to end up being a kosher sukkah without you building it? It just happened to arrive because I added some earth to the ground. So now the sukkah became kosher without me actually building the sukkah. It was built, but it was built puzzle or invalid, and I just added something. So if the Gemara would say you have to redo the schach, then I could understand it. Everything would make sense. Lift up the schach and put it back down. Then I could see. Okay, so now you made a kosher walls. The size of the sukkah is kosher. Let's redo the schach. But the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara sounds like and that's the way the commentaries understand it. That this sukkah is a kosher. It's a kosher sukkah. You filled it up with this earth, and now it's going to be a kosher sukkah. So the commentaries talk about this at length. This problem of tasev loiman also. It is something that we'll see maybe later in the tractate. But the answers that are given, one of them is that the problem of tasev loiman ha'asui is when the schach itself is a problem. What would be an example of that? An example would be, let's say you have branches of a tree that's growing, and those branches are being used as your schach. So you built your sukkah right near a tree, and you have these beautiful palm branches that are covering your sukkah so perfectly. They're attached to the tree and they're growing, and that is not considered kosher schach because it's attached to the ground. But you built yourself a sukkah and you have palm branches, the fronds on top of your schach. So what do you want to do? Just detach them. Let me just detach them. So you go with your some type of a scissor or electric saw, and you just detach them from the tree. And now they're in the same place where they were. They didn't move. They're just detached from the tree, and you now have a kosher sukkah out of nowhere. The sukkah was non-kosher, and you just detached them, and now the sukkah became kosher. So that's a case where it's a problem. Tasev leiman asi. You did not build a kosher sukkah. You build a non-kosher sukkah, and you did some type of indirectly made the sukkah kosher. You somehow caused the sukkah. Now the schach is now kosher, but the schach was never placed. You never placed kosher schach, kosher roof on your sukkah. It was there before, and it was not kosher, and you somehow koshered it, but you didn't actually place it on. You didn't build the sukkah properly. The sukkah was built improperly, and somehow you koshered it, or you did some side thing that somehow koshered it. So that would be a problem. But here, the sukkah is a kosher sukkah, so to speak. The schach, I should say, the schach is let me correct that. The schach is a kosher schach. You have good schach there. It happens to be too tall. Too tall is a side element. It's not the actual schach that's not kosher. Attached schach to the tree, that is non-kosher schach. And that you can't now kosher by just cutting it, detaching it. You have to place kosher schach on the sukkah. Here, I place kosher schach on the sukkah. It happens to be the sukkah is too tall. This is a side problem. So this I could fix by making the sukkah not too tall. But is the schach can't be tasev leiman asi, not the sukkah. So if you learn it that way, that the sukkah is allowed to be made in the wrong order, so to speak. As long as the schach is kosher schach, then it's fine. So that is okay. The schach is a kosher schach. There's a side problem that the sukkah is too tall. That's one way of learning it. Another way of learning it is that the schach is really kosher schach all along. The problem is that your floor is not a kosher floor. What do I mean? Well, your floor in the sukkah is too low. If your floor would have been higher of your sukkah, then this schach is considered kosher schach for the area above the bottom floor. In other words, above the bottom amma, however tall your schach is, your kosher schach goes all the way down 20 ammas. That's where it becomes non-kosher. But above, from the above the bottom, it's all kosher schach. So all you did was made yourself a floor to be in an area of kosher schach. So it's not that the whole sukkah is a non-kosher sukkah and the schach is non-kosher, and now you're fixing the schach to be kosher schach. It's that the schach was always kosher schach. It was kosher schach for a floor that for this area that unfortunately you don't have a floor for. But now that you've made yourself a floor for it, so the schach stayed kosher. It was kosher before, and it's kosher now. Just you can't live in a sukkah that you can't stand on. You can't stand on midair. So that is not considered a proper dwelling. You can't dwell in, that way. But is the schach kosher schach? The schach in the sukkah is a kosher sukkah up until until a certain point. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. You have to. It's not necessarily does everyone agree. Would I say everyone would agree with that logic? It's a interesting logic. Yes, David.
If the sukkah is the kosher sukkah, the dimensions are good, and the schach is kosher, everything's good. But above the schach, above the sukkah, there's still branches of the tree. So my question is, how far does that go? If the branches are 10 amas, are they 20 amas, are they 50 amas? How far does that branch go to invalidate the sukkah?
Oh, however high the branches are, they could invalidate your sukkah.
So even if they're 1,000 feet above the sukkah, it can invalidate your sukkah.
Yeah. Yeah, your sukkah can't be under non-kosher schach. That it has to be a substantial size. It's not just one little branch or something. You know what I mean? If it's covering a substantial area of the 3 tefachim, 3 handbreadths by 3 handbreadths, and so on. It could either parcel that area of the sukkah, or if it's big, or it could parcel the whole sukkah, depending on how much of it is covering. It's covering, and which area of the sukkah it's covering, which we'll soon see how that works. That it could, if it's covering an area on the side of the sukkah, there's more room to be lenient than if it's covering an area that's not close to the sides. But we'll soon see. It's actually on this page of the Gemara. You'll see some ideas that will shed light on that. Yes, Victor.
So I'm just curious. The way the wording seems to be is it's only the fact that the walls are too high on the inside of the sukkah, not the outside, that matters, apparently. In other words, I'm going to walk by this sukkah and I see a 20-foot high sukkah, and I'm going to say, oh, of course, the guy, what he does is he has inside the sukkah, he's got enough straw or whatever
Right.
to make it kosher for him. But even though I'm walking by with this and I see this sukkah that's too high, that doesn't matter.
Right. Right. Interesting point. The previous Gemara had 3 reasons we saw in the Gemara about the height of the sukkah, why the rabbis say it can't be so high. All of those reasons seem to be connected to the person dwelling in the sukkah. Number one, the person dwelling in the sukkah should see the schach. It's not the person walking down the street that has to see the schach. the person dwelling in the sukkah should see the schach. The person dwelling in the sukkah should benefit from the shade of the schach, you know, and not the person walking down the street benefiting from the shade of the schach. And then the third reason was that the sukkah should be temporary and not permanent. And seemingly that as well would be connected to the person sitting in the sukkah has to be sitting in a temporary dwelling. Not the person walking by has to walk by a temporary dwelling, but the person sitting in the sukkah has to sit in a sukkah that's a temporary dwelling. So based on those reasons, which you weren't here for, but based on those reasons, seemingly, it's all connected to the person inside, not outside. And the schach is also the size of the height of the schach. It really has to be measured based on the hollow in between that and the floor. So seemingly it would only apply whatever is in the sukkah, the size of the size of the floor from the floor to the sukkah. That would be the measurement. But it's definitely a good question. Yeah, definitely a good question.
All right, now I understand the difference.
At least at least from my understanding at this point, that's the answer. We'll see if anything else changes as we learn. Yes, David.
What about Marasayan for the person walking down the street?
Right. So Marasayan is a tricky thing. I don't know if it applies to all scenarios. If you could just throw this problem of Marasayan. You shaved? Oh, who says you're allowed to Marasayan? Oh, I used a kosher shaver. Or I have, people who hold that they're allowed to shave. I don't know if they consider an issue of I don't know if Marasayan is in the equation. People. There's a limit. A person has his mezuzah inside the door because he's afraid of it getting stolen. It's Marasayan. I don't know if you could throw that all places. You know what I mean? It deserves to be looked into. Where do we say Marasayan, and where don't we? The law of sukkah is that the inside of the sukkah has to be a certain height. So I don't know if you could just say, well, it's Marasayan. You don't see anything from outside the sukkah. You don't know what the inside of the sukkah is. You might have a golden marble floor in there. I mean, so I'm not really sure if you could just throw that idea. Listen, if we see it discussed, that would be interesting. What is the criteria of making rules of Marasayan? When do we say Marasayan and when don't we? I'm not 100% sure you can just throw it there and be concerned about Marasayan.
So if you're walking down the street, you see somebody's sukkah is very, 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 very high. They're like 50 feet tall. So you're going to assume, well, it must be that the guy's schach is at the proper level. Even though this thing looks like it's 50 feet high, it must be that inside it's kosher.
Yeah, I mean, you have different options. One is you could ask the guy. Another is you could put they go around in Israel with big papers called pashkavilan. They're protests and things, and they have a painter's type of a wheel where they paint glue. They stick the paper on and you paint it. You can stick one of those papers on top of his sukkah and say, this sukkah is too tall, and I am protesting and sign, different ways of dealing with sukkah that's too tall. I'm just saying, I'm not sure you have to go to that extent, but you can ask the guy why he's, if he knows, if he's aware of the problem of sukkah being too tall. Again, I'm not sure that that you have to be so concerned of the of this issue. Again, how do you know that it's so tall? I mean, you'd really have to measure it and start questioning. So it's not normally so easily detectable of how the exact size of the sukkah. I know the Shul of Bal Harbor used to have a huge sukkah, very, very high sukkah, nice big high ceiling. They changed it now because they rebuilt their building, but they used to have a beautiful. I would say it's probably the biggest sukkah in the state of Florida, or in the South. Uh, uh, but and it was nice and high. But to say that it's over 30 feet, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess we could have measured it, gone
I
down and
thought you were
measured
gonna.
it, taken it,
I thought you were gonna say they changed it because too many people were complaining that they walked by
complaining,
and it
right?
looked too high.
It looked too high, right? It was actually on a platform. It was above the street level, and it was on the built it was built on their an upper area, from the but anyway, yeah, again, it's more like a Mea She'arim type of thing to go start making protests and things like that. It's not exactly yeah. So again, I'm not saying the question is not a good question, Marasayan. The real question is, when do we decree Marasayan laws and when don't we? And it's beyond the scope of this of today's class. Is this an area that we should make a Marasayan rule for? But I think it's a good question. When do we say Marasayan and when don't we? All right. So anyway, let's continue over here. So we're learning over here about being mavatel, nullifying either teven, which is straw, or offer. And then the Gemara said that there's different ways of nullifying it. Either you verbally nullify it, and at least this is the way Rashi understands the Gemara. There are other commentaries that learn a little differently, but the simple understanding of Rashi is that when you nullify it verbally, that's like the best way of nullifying something. But then there's another option of nullifying it, is where it's ein asid lefanoisai, which means that you're not planning on removing it. You're gonna leave it there, but you didn't verbally do it, so you're not planning on removing it. And in such a case, that would be with regard to straw that you're not planning on removing it. You're going to leave it there for sukkahs, but you didn't verbally say that, or verbally say you're nullifying it. So in such a case, it would be an argument between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanon and the rabbis. The same thing would apply offer stam. If you just put earth there, so it's not straw, it's earth, but it's totally you totally don't know when you're going to remove it or not. You might take it today, later on today. If your workers need to build something, they might come back and take it. So basically, if you are mavatel, if you nullify it with verbally, that would be the ideal situation, and that the Gemara says is batel, it will work. And the Gemara says havi miut, that is considered a way of minimizing the size of the sukkah, havi miut. And but the other scenario is where you didn't verbally do it. That's where it becomes a question. And the Gemara says this is connected to this whole machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanon regarding the laws of Tumah, which we talked about yesterday at more length, where basically the law of Tumah is that the impurity of a corpse could either be contained under some type of a tent, an oihel, or it doesn't get contained under the tent, and instead it just pierces the sky and pierces the earth. And this is regarding laws of tumah and tahara that generally don't apply too much today, because we don't have kudshim, we don't have holy things and karbanos, and we don't go to the Beis Hamikdash. But the idea, the law of it is a Mishnah and Alais, and And I guess it could apply to Koyanim today, that Koyanim are not supposed to become tummy from a corpse. So this would be a law. Is this considered a tumah? Are they allowed to go on the next floor if there's a corpse in the floor below? Would the Kohen be allowed to go on the floor above if the corpse is flush with the ceiling? Seemingly, again, it's complicated laws, the laws of tumah, but seemingly it would be what happens if the person is the corpse is they put earth and cover the corpse in a cover the corpse all the way up to the ceiling with earth. So the Gemara here brings this Mishnah where it talks about a bias shemaluhu teven aitzroirois ubitlu. It's mavotol. If they were mavatal it, then it's considered rebuttal, nullified. In other words, the person there's no space between the corpse and the ceiling, and in such a case, the tumah pierces to the up to the all the way up to the sky and all the way down to the earth. But
Do you mean the corpse is inside the sukkah?
we're not talking about a sukkah now. We're giving an example from a case in Olois where there is some type of a oihel, maybe a tent, but the tent is either has empty space or it doesn't have an empty space. If there's empty space between the corpse and the roof of the tent, then a space of a tefach, a handbreadth, then that would mean that the tent is considered a kosher tent. It contains the tumah in the tent, and then if a kohen wants to go above that tent, or if some item goes above that tent, it will not become impure because the tumah is contained in the tent. But if there's no space, and how could there be no space? Well, either the corpse is flush with the ceiling of it, or if the corpse is covered over with earth. If the corpse is covered over with earth, that would be a case of there's no tent, there's no space, and the tumah would actually pierce the sky. I'm not exactly sure how this works nowadays with regard to graves, because normally when when someone's buried, so at some point the coffin breaks and the earth above it falls down, and so at that point there's no more space in between the corpse and the roof of the coffin, and because of that, it would seem like the halacha might change when that happens. And here in Florida, they charge you a fee of I think they charge a fee for covering it afterwards, because they sort of have to fill in after the earth lowers and falls down. Now, the other thing in Florida is that they put a cement liner here. Now, the cement liner, seemingly the cement line, depending on how big it is and how big the coffin is, could be that cement liner actually leaves an empty space. Now, some rabbanim, they fill up the liner with earth. Now, if you fill up the liner with earth, which is, they say here in Florida, they use these cement liners because of the Everglades, the water, so there's so much water, so the corpses could float around. They use the cement liner, but there's many there are two cemeteries here that don't use the cement liner. But if they use a cement liner, seemingly there might be an empty space of a tefach between the coffin and the liner. And if there is, then maybe that would mean that the kohen might be able to walk over it. I don't know. I mean, it's a cemetery. I guess I wonder how that would work, because here in Florida, if in a cemetery that they force you to have this liner, I don't know the size, and I never measured how big on top of the coffin does the liner go. But that might be a reason why it's might like contain the tumah. Again, the laws of tumah are not the simplest laws, and most people don't really study these laws. It's not part of the smicha process. They don't test you on this to get smicha, but But anyway, the case that we're talking about does apply to halacha because we're talking about the laws of sukkah, and if you want to apply these laws, they do have application. So the Gemara says that there could be a case where we would have the same machlekes, where Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis, Rabbi Yossi seems to be more machmir because the rabbis hold. I'm sorry. The rabbis hold that you need to be mavatalit specific. You need to clearly be mavatalit to make the earth buttal, to make it nullified. You have to verbally say that it's buttal. I am nullifying this for the time till we remove this corpse. I'm nullifying this earth or nullifying this teven, this straw. According to Rabbi Yossi, even if you didn't exactly, you weren't mavatel clearly, but as long as you know you're not going to be removing it, so you didn't verbally do it, it's considered batel as well. And upper stam, if it's plain upper, this is where maybe we should read this inside. It's a little, yeah, it's let's actually just learn it inside because I'm not exactly sure where we stopped yesterday, somewhere in the middle of this. So let's just start from the beginning over here. Teven, ditnan. Let's start with the word ditnan, as we learned in a Mishnah. We're on 4 lines from the top of the page. We're on 4a. Ditnan, as we learned in a Mishnah, a room or a house that was filled with straw or with pebbles, ubitloi, and someone was mevatel, verbally said that he's going to be leaving these pebbles or this straw there as long as the corpse is there. He verbally said he's nullifying it to leave it there. Mevutel, it will be considered batel. It will be considered nullified, and which will basically make the law of this tent that the corpse is under, that it's not considered a real tent because there's no empty space. And the tumah, the impurity, will just pierce the sky and go pierce all the way earth below, and the tent will not contain the tumah. Also, additionally, it has a leniency because anything else that's under the tent will not become tameh because the tumah just goes up and down, but it doesn't get contained into the tent to contaminate anything else in the tent. Now, the Gemara says, bidlu in loy bidlu loy, that this means that you specifically have to verbally nullify these items, the straw and the pebbles, but which basically means earth as well. But if you didn't do it, it would not. If you didn't verbally nullify it, it would not be considered like it's not there, like it's there. Instead, it would be considered like it's not there because maybe it's only there temporarily because you weren't mevatel it, didn't verbally nullify it there. So therefore, it's as if it's not there. And then we would say this is a tent; it's a kosher tent because because whatever you left there is really not taking up space. Physically it's taking up some space, but it's not officially there. It happens to be there, but it's not. But there's really a tent over here. But Tani Alon, we learned on this that in other words, there was a brisa that gives another opinion, and that's Rabbi Yossi's opinion, and it comes out it's a machlekes. Rabbi Yossi holds, Rabbi Yossi Omer Tevin, that if you have straw vein asid lefanois, you don't plan on removing it. In other words, you are you didn't verbally say that you're gonna leave it there, but your plan is to leave it there. Harehu ka'afer stam, it is considered like regular earth that you don't even have to plan on leaving it there. If you just have no thought at all and it's just earth, it is considered ubatel. It will be batel because earth is automatically nullified, and we assume you're leaving it there. And straw, as long as you plan on leaving it there, that is considered batel as well. and we accept that and consider it batel, it's nullified, and what it ends up happening is there is no tent to this tuma, to this impurity, this corpse, because what you did was you filled up the gap. Offer the asid lefanoisai, but if it's earth that you plan on removing, harehu kistam teven, that is like if you just put straw and you didn't have in mind to leave it there, the loy batel, and it will not be nullified. So that's basically the conclusion of this discussion of nullifying earth or straw with regard to sukkah is basically the same law as it is regarding law of purity and impurity, tum and tahara, and laws of always laws of tents. And the conclusion would be that it would be a machlekes if you put straw and you didn't verbally say that you're going to leave it there for the whole sukkahs. So this basically the suggestion is if you want to cover all grounds, fill up your sukkah with earth and nullify it. Or the truth is, and straw, the same thing. Nullify it and say you're leaving it there for the whole sukkahs. Verbally say that, and then you would cover yourself from to cover all opinions. Okay, so now we're up to the next piece of Gemara, and
so Rabbi, question:
yes.
If you do this,
Mm-hmm.
does that make your sukkah kosher?
Yeah.
So in other words, as long as you put stuff in there that makes the separation between the straw or the dirt and the schach is less than 20 amot, then you're fine.
Right. That's what the Gemara is saying.
Irrespective of what people see outside.
Right. So that's touching on David's question of this seems to be and the truth is Victor also sort of touched upon that, where that it looks on the outside to be more than 20 amis, but I'm not familiar enough with the laws of Marasayan when you can make such a decree, but it doesn't seem like the Gemara is concerned about this idea of Marasayan.
So
there must be rules when we're worried about it, when we're not.
Okay, so here's the reason why I'm even mentioning this, because first you could probably do something, and as you said, is to put a document on the outside saying that the walls on the outside appear to be more than 20 amot high, but on the inside we've nullified whatever it is to make it a kosher sukkah. And this comes from the fact that Rabbi Lehrfield's third yahrzeit was today. And his son spoke on Shabbat about a situation in which his father basically said something to the effect of, you can mourn for me the 30 days, but then I absolve you of having to mourn for me beyond the 12 months. It doesn't mean not saying Kaddish, but so that in some cases, one of the rabbi's sons is a rav of a shul, and he was explaining that he has like 4 or 5 weddings a month that he has to go to, and had his father not given that psak to him, and he brought many examples and discussions regarding this, then he would have had to not participate. But the reason why I'm bringing it is that when he goes to these things, he has to tell people that my father gave absolution to go to these things. And so this reminds me of what's happening over here. That if on the outside you put something that basically says it appears as if, but it's not the case, then you could probably take away all the maratayin that people might have.
Right. No, I hear you. The only thing I would add to what you're saying is that there might be a difference. A sukkah that's above 20 amos is not so visible to the naked eye how the exact height of it. But when you see a Rav doing a wedding, there's no way to to get around the fact that he's there. It's clear that he's standing right there. So the fact that he's careful to sort of like to make it known that his father absolved him from, which is a very interesting halacha, which is not a well-known halacha. The fact that his father absolved him of that is something that makes sense that he's going and making a statement about. But the fact that a sukkah is, first of all, it's very rare to have such a tall sukkah. But when a person does, I mean, I'm guessing that it's not much bigger than 20 amos. So in that case, it's hard for a person to really know, how big, 20 amos is just from walking down the road. You know what I mean? Like you're not exactly sure. And even if it is above 20 amos, there are two opinions how big an amma is. So it could be that he's relying on, could also be relying on the bigger shita, like the Chazon Ish has a much bigger opinion than the Chaim Noah. There's two main views of how big an amma is, either 2 feet and 1.5. So it could be that you could fall into a category where it's kosher according to one opinion for sure, or it could also be that it's hard to measure because you're walking down the street, you don't really see it. So that's sort of why I'm saying, like, I'm not sure how far we take this Marasayan law to say you have to make an announcement, that I'm not doing anything wrong. People shouldn't get the wrong impression. If it's not clear that this is a sin, I don't know that it's that Marasayan applies. I mean, if it's outright, it looks like a sin, then I could understand that Marasayan would apply. It's just a thought. I'm not saying this based on straight and something that I saw in Shulchan Aruch. I'm just saying that logically, it seems to me that Marasayan wouldn't really apply here. Now, maybe if your sukkah was huge and it was 100 feet, it was the size of the Empire State Building or something, and then you want to put a sign up, I could understand, there's many floors and we don't use the bottom sukkah, we only use the top one, and we have floors in this sukkah, and the second, the bottom is not used for a sukkah or something, and we have a sturdy ground somehow, and and it fits within the, we're going to be learning about a sukkah that's on top of a sukkah. So then maybe I could hear something like that. Maybe it would make sense to put a sign up. Although I don't know. We'll have to see if the Gemara brings any idea of Marasayan. So we'll have to stay tuned. Okay. So anyway, getting back to our Gemara here, we have the next case. The next case is a sukkah that's above 20 amos, but the branches, the tips of the branches, are lowered. They're hanging down into the 20 amos area. So the Gemara says, what happens if the sukkah is above 20 amos, the schach, Bohutin, the tops of the branches, are hanging below Yarden B'Seich Esramam. They're lowered into the 20 amos area. So there's basically a less than a 20 amma gap. Or there's exactly 20 amos, but in Silson Meruba Mechamasim, so the Gemara says that if the shade of these tips of the schach is more than the heat, than the chamasim, than their non-shade, than the heat, which basically means if you would remove the upper schach, that's non-kosher schach, and the bottom stuff, the hutzin, which are the tips of the schach, alone would give enough sail, enough shade for the sukkah, that the sukkah will be a properly shaded sukkah. So kshera, it is considered kosher, and we consider it as if the hutzin are the main schach, and it's considered kosher because that's the schach. The schach is the hutzin, and v'im lav, and if not, meaning if the hutzin schach is not so abundant, that you don't have that much of it, and if we're going to remove the upper schach, it will not give enough shade. So then psula, it will be puzzled, because in such a case, the main schach is above 20 amas. The Gemara now continues. It says, "Haisa gavaya asara tfachim." What happens if the sukkah was 10 tfachim high? And this Gemara comes right after the previous Gemara. You'll see why. So the sukkah is 10 tfachim high. Again, that's the minimum size of height for a sukkah. So this is not the same as the previous case was maximum size height. Here it's the minimum size height, 10 tfachim, 10 handbreadths. V'hutzin yardin l'seich asara, and you have hutzin, which are these tips of the schach, that are the upper top area of the top area of the schach is yardin l'seich asara. So now this area is lowered into the 10 tfachim of the sukkah. So your sukkah is supposed to be 10 tfachim, and the thing is that you have schach that's some of it is lowered into the 10 tfachim, which means you don't really have a full 10 tfachim of area of living space in this sukkah. It's a very low sukkah, and you don't have it's now getting smaller. As it was only 10 tfachim, which is maybe between 30 to 40 inches. It's a very low sukkah. And then now it's getting even smaller. So the hutzin are yardin, they're lowered into that 10. So savar Abai lememer. So Abai says, based on the previous Gemara, I have a understanding of how the halacha should be. He says, Im chamasan meruba mitzilasa, if these hutzin are such a small amount that it's not giving schach, proper schach, to the proper shade to the sukkah. So if that's so, he says, then kshera, it should be kosher, because we should consider this lowered schach not the main schach. And the upper schach is really the main schach. And therefore, how much space is there from the floor to the main schach? It's 10 tefachim. I have my full 10 tefachim, my minimum size of a sukkah, and this should be kosher. So he's using the logic of the previous Gemara and saying, let's apply it over here as well to a minimum sukkah. Amar le Rava, but Rava says, no, you got it wrong, because even if you want to consider this schach as if it's not really schach, because it's doesn't do the job giving shade, enough shade, nevertheless, hadira srucha, this is a dira srucha, this is a lowly dwelling, and literally srucha means smelly, but seemingly here it would just mean like you can't dwell in such a tiny area, and so it's a dira srucha. Ve'ein adam dar b'dira srucha, a person can't live in such a dira srucha, and therefore it would be considered puzzle, and which the understanding would be that it's invalid. The Rambam, interestingly enough, says that you have to be careful not to, that the hutzin shouldn't, and the leaves shouldn't lower into the 10 tefachim, in order that it shouldn't bother a person when he's sitting there. So the understanding that they say from the Rambam is that it's really a kosher sukkah. It's just b'diavad. After the fact, it's kosher. The simple reading of the Gemara is that it's not kosher. So all the commentaries try to figure out why does the Rambam say that it's kosher b'diavad based on this Gemara. The Gemara gives, I mean, the way Rava says it, as Abaye said, it's kosher. What is Rava probably saying? He's arguing. He's saying it's a dira srucha, but it sounds like it's not kosher. So the commentaries all struggle to figure out how the Rambam could just jump and say, "Oh, it's kosher, but it's b'diavad. It's better not to." Where do you see that in the wording of the Gemara? So the Shulchan Aruch doesn't follow the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch says that this is a non-kosher sukkah. There you have leaves going down into the 10 tefachim of the living areas in dira srucha. It's not a kosher sukkah. Yes, Ezra.
So the way I understand it is the following: if this is a kosher sukkah, then there should be more shade than sunlight inside the sukkah. But what they're talking about is the sunlight that's inside the sukkah versus the shade produced by the outside leaves. So if the sunlight inside the sukkah is greater than the shade provided by the outside leaves, for all intents and purposes, the sunlight is nullifying the outside leaves altogether. But the sunlight itself is being nullified by the shade produced by the inside, on the inside by the leaves on the inside. So therefore, based on that, the sukkah is kosher.
Wait, you're trying to explain the Rambam. Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, I'm trying to explain it based upon what was being said here.
Well, one second.
It's the only way that I can understand this.
But so 1 second. Do you want to explain the first Gemara about a tall sukkah?
No.
The just
second one,
the second part. Okay.
the 10 tefachim one.
So
Okay.
there's a machlokes here between Abaye and Rava. So which opinion do you want to explain? Abaye's opinion or Rava's opinion?
Well, what I'm not explaining the one about the fact that it's a sagging deal. I'm not worried. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about trying to understand what Abaye is basically saying. He's saying im hamatam miruba mitzilatam.
Right.
So I think he's talking about tzilatam of the outside leaves, and hamatam is the inside sunlight. Because that's exactly what they're talking about in the previous one. They're talking about if the outside leaves provide more shade than the inside sunlight. I mean, this is the way the Safari explains it. Okay, then in that particular situation, in the first case, the one above it, basically what they're saying is that it's a kosher sukkah due to the outside, the sunlight being less than the shade provided by the outside part of the palm branches. And so here they're comparing again the inside sunlight versus the outside palm branches. So if it turns out that the inside sunlight is greater than the shade provided by the outside branches, and it itself must be less than what the palm branches on the inside provides in terms of shade, then it's considered to be a kosher sukkah.
Ezra, thank you for bringing that in. I didn't learn it exactly that way. I learned it a little differently, but maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow. But maybe I'll take a look at the Sefaria just to see it. It was a hard read. I'll put it that way. It wasn't the smoothest thing to follow what you were saying from the Sefaria. But I'll take a look at the Sefaria, see how he's explaining, because there are different farshim here, different commentaries in the Rishonim. I tried to explain it according to Rashi. But anyway, maybe we'll talk a little about it tomorrow. Okay, Sei gesund, everyone.
It's interesting that Rava does not say Sula.
Right, true, true. That's true. Okay, very
Says
good.
it
Thank you,
it's
Shara.
inappropriate.
Very good. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Zygazant, have a great day. Yeah, thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.